Just as James Bond has escaped danger time and again in the most iconic scenes in cinema, Aston Martin has also managed to escape, time after time, from financial collapse. For over a century, the British brand with the winged logo has endured wars, economic crises, dramatic leadership changes, last-minute rescues, and yet it still stands. In fact, it's no coincidence that Agent 007 and Aston Martin are so closely linked. The legendary DB5, produced in 1963, wasn't just the car chosen for Goldfinger. It became the ultimate symbol of the brand's golden era, and the best-selling model in its history. Since that debut, Aston Martin has embodied the purest expression of what it means to drive in British style. Understated luxury, aggressive elegance, and an almost aristocratic obsession with speed. Because despite its many ups and downs, it has always been a brand favored by royalty, elite athletes, Hollywood stars, and motorsport legends like Carroll Shelby, Roy Salvadori, and today's Formula One driver for the team, Fernando Alonso. But one big question remains. How has such an unstable company survived in such a ruthless market? A market where bigger and better funded names vanished without a trace. Today, we travel back more than 100 years to uncover the origin, rise, downfall, and resurrection of Aston Martin, the British brand that has reinvented itself time and again, and that, against all odds, still holds its place at the top of the automotive world. At the dawn of the 20th century, the world was racing toward a new era. The automotive industry, still in its infancy, was already roaring to life in Germany, France, and the United States. Names like Benz, Daimler, Peugeot, Renault, and the unstoppable Henry Ford were beginning to shape the future of modern mobility. In the United Kingdom, however, the landscape was different. While brands like Rolls-Royce and Bentley were producing luxury vehicles for the aristocracy, most cars were still imported. There was a missing piece, a domestic brand that could blend British spirit with sporting engineering. That gap would soon be filled by two young visionaries who set out to write their own chapter in automotive history: Lionel Martin and Robert Bamford. Born in 1878 in Cornwall, Martin came from a well-off family and had a deep passion for speed cycling. From a young age, he showed a knack for modifying and optimizing his bicycles to improve their performance. Robert Bamford, on the other hand, was born in 1883 in Nottinghamshire, into a family of engineers. Unlike Martin, Bamford had a more technical background, specializing in the manufacturing and maintenance of machinery. Their shared passion naturally led them to cross paths, and to one shared obsession: the automobile. They met in early 1912, while both were working with cars from the now defunct Singer Company, one of Britain's earliest manufacturers of small and affordable vehicles. Together, they realized that these cars had untapped potential for performance, but were far from reaching it. In 1913, they partnered to form Bamford and Martin Limited, with the goal of taking existing cars, particularly Singers, and pushing them to the next level: lighter, faster, more agile. But Lionel Martin's ambitions didn't stop at modifying. He wanted to build something of his own, a British machine built to compete. It wasn't just a romantic notion, it was a near obsession, and that dream had a clear inspiration. In the years prior, Martin had competed in several local races, but one in particular left a lasting impression: the Aston Hill Climb, a grueling hill race near the village of Aston, Clinton, where lightweight cars were put to the test on steep, winding roads. In 1914, using a modified Singer chassis and a 1.4-liter Coventry simplex engine, the two partners built their first sports prototype. Naturally, they took it to Aston Hill and left a mark. That's when the name came to them, almost instinctively. Aston from the hill climb, Martin from its creator and driver. Aston Martin was born. The future looked bright for the newborn company, but that same year, World War I broke out, and everything changed. The outbreak of World War I brought the dreams of many emerging companies to a screeching halt, and Aston Martin was no exception. Like the rest of British industry, its fledgling production was forced to yield to the priorities of the war effort. During those years, Robert Bamford enlisted in the army, while Lionel Martin stayed behind in the small workshop. But it was no longer a hub of innovation. It had become a space frozen in time, with no staff, no production, and no future in sight. When the war finally ended in 1918, the world had changed, and so had the fate of the company. Bamford, worn down by the war and disillusioned with the direction of the business, decided to step away for good in 1920. Martin was left alone. And although he tried to keep the brand, bearing his own name, alive, the post-war climate offered little support. Inflation, resource shortages, and a sluggish British economy painted a bleak picture. By 1924, with mounting debts and insufficient income, Aston Martin was officially declared bankrupt. Then, an unexpected figure entered the scene. Louis Borowski, an aristocrat, race car driver, and passionate motorsport enthusiast, chose to invest in the company. Borowski wasn't your typical businessman. He was a wealthy eccentric with a love for speed and impossible challenges. His financial backing gave Aston Martin a much-needed second wind, but fate, once again, proved merciless. That same year, Borowski died in a tragic crash during the Italian Grand Prix while driving a Mercedes. With his death, hopes of a sustainable recovery vanished as quickly as they had appeared. By 1925, Lionel Martin had no choice but to face the inevitable. He sold his stake and walked away from the very company he had founded, closing the chapter on his pioneering role in what was still an emerging legend. Control of the company passed into the hands of two new protagonists, Augustus Bertelli and Bill Renwick. Both brought technical expertise and renewed ambition. In 1926, they re-established the firm under a new name, Aston Martin Motors Limited. Bertelli took charge as technical director and chief designer. He quickly moved operations to Feltham, aiming to give the brand a more competitive identity. Under his leadership, Aston Martin focused on producing light, refined, and track-oriented cars. Models like the International, Le Mans, and Ulster. Throughout the 1930s, these vehicles began to make their mark on the European racing scene. At events like the 24 Hours of Le Mans and the French Grand Prix, Aston Martin showed remarkable grit, though always with limited resources. Despite technical progress, financial struggles persisted. Sales remained low, and production was still artisanal in scale. Then, in 1939, history repeated itself. With the outbreak of World War II, Aston Martin, like many other British firms, was forced to halt automobile production and join the wartime industrial effort. When the conflict ended in 1945, Aston Martin once again found itself in ruins. No capital, no strong distribution network, and in a global market that demanded large-scale production, the company once again needed saving. The iconic winged badge was not yet ready to take flight, but its time was coming. By the end of the World War II, Aston Martin was barely a shadow of its former self. 2 more years of hardship seemed to be leading the company straight into oblivion. until a name appeared that would change everything: David Brown. Born in 1904 in Yorkshire, Brown was a true British industrialist. He had turned his family's agricultural transmission business into a heavy machinery empire, the David Brown Group. In 1947, a simple classified ad in the Times newspaper caught his eye. Aston Martin for sale. Price: £20,500. What others saw as a sinking ship, Brown saw as a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. In today's terms, it was just over $1.5 million. Without much hesitation, he bought it. But he didn't stop there. That same year, he also acquired Lagonda, another historic British marque known for its refined engineering and six-cylinder engine, designed by none other than W.O. Bentley, the founder of Bentley Motors. With both brands under his wing, Brown founded Aston Martin Lagonda Limited, launching the most iconic era in the brand's history, the DB era. The first model of this new chapter arrived in 1948, the DB1, named after Brown's own initials. It was followed by the DB2 in 1950, now powered by the Lagonda six-cylinder engine and designed not only for the racetrack, but also for discerning customers seeking performance wrapped in elegance. Endurance racing events like Le Mans became the perfect stage to restore the brand's prestige. The DB3, launched the following year, was the first model built solely for competition. But it was the DB3S, unveiled in 1953, that won over the purists. For 5 years, it embodied the brand's most competitive spirit until the arrival of a true icon. In 1958, Aston Martin introduced the DB4, a revolutionary grand tourer built on an ultralight body designed by Italy's Carrozzeria Touring. It was a technological and aesthetic leap that paved the way for the crown jewel of the brand, the DB5. Launched in 1963 with a 4.0-liter engine producing 282 horsepower, it reached 143 miles per hour. Astonishing for a luxury car of its time. But what turned it into a legend wasn't just its specs, it was the movies. In 1964, James Bond, played by Sean Connery, drove the DB5 in Goldfinger. With that single scene, the DB5 stopped being just a car and became the most famous car in the world. The commercial and cultural success of Aston Martin was undeniable, and while its models dazzled on screen, they also triumphed on the track. In 1959, with the DBR1, the company achieved its greatest victory, winning the 24 Hours of Le Mans with Carroll Shelby and Roy Salvadori behind the wheel. Only 5 units were ever built, making the DBR1 a priceless gem in classic motorsport history. That same year, Aston Martin ventured into Formula One, though without notable results. The top tier of racing wouldn't be where the brand shined, but its reputation in the world of GT racing was already unmatched. David Brown had done the unthinkable, turning a bankrupt company into a symbol of British elegance and mechanical performance. But glory did not translate into profitability, and that, once again, would be Aston Martin's curse. The second half of the 1960s brought a perfect storm: an oil crisis, new environmental regulations, luxury taxes, and pressure from competitors with far greater production scale. Sales began to fall, and with them, the brand's stability. In 1972, after 25 years at the helm, David Brown was forced to sell Aston Martin. The buyer was Company Developments Limited, an investment consortium that inherited a brand steeped in prestige, but also burdened with financial trouble. Thus ended the most glorious era in the brand's history. The DB5 had conquered Hollywood. The DBR1 had conquered Le Mans. But the balance sheet offered no mercy. Once again, Aston Martin was walking a financial tightrope. Company Developments, an investment group based in Birmingham, had ambitious plans for Aston Martin. However, the capital needed to transform the company never materialized, and just 2 years later, in 1974, Aston Martin was once again on the brink of bankruptcy. The factory's operations collapsed. From 460 employees, fewer than 100 remained. A clear sign of a company heading for extinction. But like any great British story, the final blow was dodged at the very last moment. In 1975, a consortium of American businessmen, led by Peter Sprague, George Minden, and Alan Curtis, acquired the company. Not for profits or dividends, but out of sheer passion. Under their leadership, 2 key models were born. The Aston Martin V8 Vantage in 1977. Brutal, aggressive, elegant. Hailed by the press as Britain's first supercar. And the Volante, a convertible version that blended glamour with muscle. Both cars put Aston Martin back on the radar. But they didn't solve the brand's Achilles heel. Limited production, tight margins, and a fragile structure that couldn't compete with giants like Ferrari or Porsche. In 1981, the original investors withdrew, and once again, ownership changed hands. This time, Victor Gauntlet stepped in, a British entrepreneur with a fighting spirit and deep love for classic sports cars. Gauntlet acquired 55% of the company and quickly revived a sleeping symbol, the alliance with James Bond. In 1987, the V8 Vantage appeared in The Living Daylights, starring Timothy Dalton. A nod to longtime fans, and a desperate call for attention. But Gauntlet knew passion wasn't enough. What the company needed was industrial muscle, and that came in the form of an American giant, Ford Motor Company. In 1987, Ford acquired 75% of Aston Martin, bringing something the brand hadn't seen in decades: capital, technology, and stability. Backed by Ford, the British marque began its true resurrection, and its emblem was a model destined to make history: the Aston Martin DB5. Unveiled in 1994 and designed by Ian Callum, the DB5 combined the timeless silhouette of a British GT with a powerful Jaguar-derived engine. Refined, agile, and elegant, it became the best-selling Aston Martin to date, surpassing 7,000 units. A modest number by global standards, but monumental for a brand that had always lived on the edge. Driven by that momentum, Ford acquired 100% of the company in 2000 and made a bold move, building a brand new factory in Gaydon, Warwickshire, the future home of Aston Martin. The new era started strong. In 2001 came the Vanquish, which accompanied Pierce Brosnan's Bond in Die Another Day, 2002. Then came the DB9, launched in 2004, a more powerful and sophisticated successor to the DB7, with an aluminum body and a 6.0-liter V12. By 2005, Aston Martin had achieved the unthinkable, doubling its production and reaching 5,000 units per year for the first time. But time was once again against them. In 2007, the global financial crisis forced Ford to restructure its luxury brand portfolio. Aston Martin, along with Jaguar, Volvo, and Land Rover, was no longer profitable for a company facing its own internal troubles. Once again, the British icon found itself on the edge of the abyss. The American giant, shaken by the looming financial crisis, decided to focus on its most profitable brands. And so, after nearly 2 decades of support, Aston Martin was once again put up for sale. In March of that year, a consortium led by British entrepreneur David Richards, founder of ProDrive and a key figure in motorsport, acquired the company for $925 million. Ford retained a 12% stake, but Aston Martin became independent once again for the first time since the 1930s. That freedom came with both a promise and a risk. Without the umbrella of a major automotive group, the company had to prove it could stand on its own, that it could be small but invincible. And their answer came in the form of a carbon fiber missile. The Aston Martin 177, a radical hypercar produced in a limited run of just 77 units. It packed a naturally aspirated 7.3-liter V12 engine, delivering 750 horsepower. It was the most powerful Aston Martin ever built, but also the most symbolic, a bold declaration of intent. The 177 marked the beginning of a new era where the brand leaned into artisan hyper-luxury, competing with the likes of Bugatti, Pagani, and Koenigsegg, not in volume, but in reverence. And while the models earned praise, the financial balance sheets remained in the red. In 2012, aiming to strengthen its finances, Aston Martin sold a stake to the Kuwaiti group investment DAR. This new injection of capital enabled their official return to endurance racing. Aston Martin Racing. Le Mans was once again painted green. They won the GTE class in 2017, and again in the 2020 WEC season. A return worthy of their legacy. But even those sporting laurels weren't enough. The rise of electrification and the global pandemic hit hard in 2019. Sales plummeted. Uncertainty returned. And like so many times in its history, Aston Martin needed a new savior. This time, he came from Canada. Lawrence Stroll, fashion mogul and motorsport investor, acquired 25% of the company. With him came a clear vision: to build a brand that was sustainable, modern, and competitive, both on and off the track. The bet was twofold. On one side, innovation and electrification, with models like the Valhalla, the brand's first hybrid supercar. On the other, a full return to Formula One, rebranding Racing Point as the Aston Martin F1 team. Many recalled, with skepticism, the brand's failed attempts in the 1950s and 60s, but this time the strategy was different. A proper factory team based in Silverstone, with a brand new facility and multi-million-dollar investment. The signing of Sebastian Vettel brought credibility. The rise of Lance Stroll, son of the majority shareholder, brought controversy. And the arrival of Fernando Alonso in 2023, a living legend, gave the project undeniable legitimacy. Today, Aston Martin stands at a crossroads between its glorious past and an uncertain future. Will it rewrite its legacy with hybrid engines and Formula One titles? Or will it repeat the cycle of broken promises, partial comebacks, and new bailouts? And so, we conclude the fascinating story of Aston Martin, a brand that, much like its legendary DB5, has escaped financial explosions, industrial chases, and near extinction, with style, precision, and unmistakable British pride. Aston Martin has proven it's not just about building cars, it's about crafting legends. And as long as James Bond lives on the silver screen, there's a good chance that new automotive icons will follow. If you've had a close encounter with Aston Martin, or you're simply passionate about the world of cars, we'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. And if this story gripped you, you might want to discover how the genius of a single man forever changed the history of Formula One through his masterpiece, Lotus. See you in the next video.